254,000 babies were born in South Korea in 2025. That is 16,000 more than the year before, a jump of almost 7% and the biggest annual increase in 15 years. For a country that spent nearly a decade setting world records for low birth rates, the headline finally flipped. Births are going up. I grew up in Korea, and for years the story about my country was one straight line pointing down. So when the number turned, it felt like something had genuinely changed. Then I looked at the rest of the data. The rebound is real, but it does not reverse what is coming. It barely dents it. This is what South Korea's population is actually doing, in numbers. The good news, and the part the good news cannot fix. Start with the good news, because it is earned. South Korea's total fertility rate is the average number of children a woman is expected to have. In 2023, it hit an all-time low of 0.72. To put that in perspective, a population holds itself steady at about 2.1. Korea was sitting at a third of that, the lowest figure ever recorded for any country. Then it turned. In 2024, the rate rose to 0.75, its first increase in 9 years. In 2025, it rose again to 0.8, according to Statistics Korea's provisional figures. That is 2 full years of climbing. Not a blip in a single month, but a sustained rise. And it was not only the rate. The raw number of births went up too. Hold on to that difference between the rate and the count, because it is the trap this whole story turns on. I will come back to it. In Korea, marriage still comes before almost every birth. Marriages collapsed during the pandemic and then bounced back hard in 2023. Births follow marriages by a year or two, right on schedule. There is a generational detail underneath all of this. The biggest jump in births came from women in their late 30s, an age group that just posted its highest birth rate on record. Koreans are still having children. They are simply having them later, and in 2025 a large group of them reached the moment they were ready. So the rebound is not a statistical mirage. It is real couples and real babies, 2 years running. Then comes the obvious question. Why? Because the answer decides whether any of this lasts. 3 things happened at the same time. The first was the pandemic rebound. Weddings that were postponed in 2020 and 2021 finally happened in 2022 and 2023, and the births arrived on cue. That is a one-time catch-up, not a new trend. Even the OECD calls Korea's recent rebound at least in part a temporary bounce after the COVID collapse. The second was timing. The women moving through their early and mid-30s right now belong to a relatively large generation, Koreans born around the early 1990s, before the birth rate truly cratered. A bigger group of potential mothers hitting their peak years together lifts the number of births even with no change in behavior. The third was money. Korea has poured billions into cash payments, parental leave, and housing support for young families. But here is what I notice as a Korean. 2 of those 3 drivers are temporary. A pandemic catch-up that is nearly spent, and a big cohort that is about to age out of childbearing. Behind them comes the generation born after the collapse. And that generation is small. This is the part the celebration skips. A birth rate is a rate. It measures births per woman. But the number of babies also depends on how many women there are to begin with. In Korea, that pool is shrinking fast because the mothers of the 2030s are the children of the record low 2010s. So you can raise the rate and still end up with fewer babies if the number of potential mothers falls faster than the rate rises. Demographers call this population momentum, and Korea's momentum is already negative. Watch the one number that cuts through everything. In 2025, Korea still had about 110,000 more deaths than births. The population did not grow. It shrank for the 6th year running, even in a rebound year. And the deaths are the other half of this story. Korea is not only having fewer children, it is aging faster than any country in recorded history. In December 2024, it crossed the line into what the UN calls a super-age society, where more than 1 in 5 people are 65 or older. There is nothing unusual about growing old. What is unusual is the speed. France took 39 years to move from an aged society to a super-aged one. Japan took 11. Korea did it in 7. No country has ever aged this fast. Put the 2 halves together. Fewer of the young generation are being born even after the rebound, while the huge generation ahead of them retires all at once. The rebound is a small updraft inside a much larger downdraft. Numbers this abstract only matter when you ask who pays. So follow the weight. Every society runs on one simple ratio. How many working-age people support each retiree? In Korea today, the old-age dependency ratio is about 28. That is 28 retirees for every 100 working-age adults. The OECD projects that this number reaches 155. That is not 100 workers supporting 28 retirees. It is 100 supporting 155. The pyramid does not simply flatten. It flips. And here's the part that stops me. The OECD ran an optimistic scenario, one where the birth rate rockets all the way back to 1.85, more than double what it is today. Even then, the dependency ratio still climbs to 117. Even a miracle rebound cannot undo it, because the people who will be old in 2060 are already born, already alive, already counted. Follow it to the end and the projections are stark. On the current path, Korea's population roughly halves by the 2080s. By then, close to 60% of everyone alive would be over 65. If you are in your 20s watching this, that is not a distant abstraction. That is the country you are scheduled to retire into. None of that is a forecast about whether people fall in love or want children. It is arithmetic that is mostly locked in. The mothers of 2045 have already been born, and there are not many of them. So both things are true at once, and that is the honest version. The rebound is real. 2 years up, more babies, a genuine turn. Korea should take the win, because more time is always worth having. But a higher rate landing on a smaller generation, while the largest generation in the country's history retires all at once, does not reverse the machine. It only slows it. The good news buys time. It does not change the destination. Here is the number I cannot unsee. Even in the best year in 15, Korea still shrank by 110,000 people. The line turned, and the country still got smaller. I break down each piece of this, how it rose, and why the cliff still wins, in the videos linked below. The numbers connect. Subscribe.